United with Christ. Meet local churches with open doors, serving throughout the Border Valley community and sharing the truth and hope of God's love and salvation. A presentation of Life Christian Broadcasting Television. And now, United with Christ.
Hello, my name is Dennis Coffman. I'm the pastor at Sun Valley Baptist Church in Northeast El Paso. We're located at 9901 McCombs in the Northeast. I want to talk to you today about the providence of God. And I don't know if you've ever thought about things that happen in this life. We often use the word chance, that things happen by chance. But God is in control of each and every instance and every incident that happens in our lives. And I want to use an example from the Bible today to tell you about how providence works and how God is in control of that. And we're going to look at the book of Ruth. But as you think about the things, when you study the Bible, there's two things that we need to keep in mind. First of all, God is sovereign. He is in control of all things. And God is holy. And His holiness and His sovereignty are interchangeable. God is holy, completely sovereign. He's completely holy. And both of those work together. So as you read the Bible, you need to think about these things and how God works things out, all things out for His good, for His glory, and it works it out for our good. And we're going to see that this morning or today in the book of Ruth, as how God works out providence. But you know, we think about things that happen oftentimes in our life, and we think of them as being bad. We think of evil. But is God in control of evil? Does He use evil, what we consider evil, for His purpose and His good? And the Bible tells us that He does. He's in control of all of that, even evil. And in Proverbs chapter 16, in verse number 4, the Bible says, "The Lord hath made all things for Himself, yea, even the wicked for the day of evil." So the things that we look at in this world that can be wicked, that we think of evil, God has a plan and a purpose even for that. And so when bad things happen, we think that things are bad, or things that are bad according to our view. God is in control of that. And we're going to see that from the book of Ruth. And we're going to see the Ruth is often called the book of coincidences. But there is no such thing as coincidence. God doesn't use that term. Coincidence is not in His vocabulary. And so we're going to look at this. We may not go through the whole time in this session, but we will finish it probably in the next session. So we have the thing here. We have Ruth and Naomi. Naomi is a woman who had lost her husband. Her husband and her two sons and her had went into the land of Moab because there was a famine in the land of Israel. God had caused a famine in there, and I think He did it for this purpose. And we'll see that, what God had in mind as we go through here. So remember now that Ruth is in the land, she is a Moabite. And Naomi and her husband and her two sons go into Moab to basically survive. And while they're there, Naomi's husband dies. So she's without a husband. And then later, her two sons die. Well, her two sons both of them had taken wives. One of them was Orpah, and the other son took a wife by the name of Ruth. But after they were married, both these two husbands, these two sons of Naomi, die as well. So now she's left without a husband, she's left without sons, and she has these two daughter-in-laws. And she tells the two daughter-in-laws to go back home to their family. She's going to go back home to Judah because she realizes now that the famine is over and things are much better. So she's going to go back home. And she tells her two daughters-in-law, go back to your families. I have nothing to offer you. I have nothing. Go back home to your families and maybe they can take care of you. So Orpah leaves. She goes back to her family. But Ruth, the Bible says, cleaves to her mother-in-law. She wants to be a part of her mother-in-law's family. And she tells her mother-in-law, wherever you go, I'm going to go. Where you live, I'm going to live. Where you die, I'm willing to die. So she just goes back into the land of Judah with her mother-in-law. Now, when they go back, they have to find a way to survive. And so Naomi tells her daughter, Ruth decides to go out into the fields and glean. This was the time of barley harvest. So in the Old Testament, God had provided for poor people that they could go out and they could reap the corners of the fields. They could pick up the grain that was left on the ground that the harvesters didn't pick up. That was a rule that He established. And the farmers were not even to cut the corners of their fields. They were supposed to leave the corners of their fields even for the poor. And so Naomi sends Ruth, or Ruth goes out and she decides to glean in the fields to help her mother-in-law. And it just so happens that she goes out and she gleans in the field of a man named Boaz. Now, she goes out and she gleans in this field. Later on, she will come back to her mother-in-law, and tell her who she gleaned in this field of Boaz. And that at that time, Naomi tells Ruth, oh, Boaz is one of our near kinsmen. In other words, he's a person who's in their family, maybe like a cousin or somebody like this. And so they're close to him. And so she tells her, Naomi tells Ruth, hey, this is a good thing. You need to go out there and you keep working in this field of Boaz because he's our relative. Then Boaz, he sees this young lady. She sees this young lady out there in the fields gleaning and working hard. And he asks who it is. Who's this young lady? Because he doesn't recognize her. She's a stranger. And I'll just interject here to remember that Ruth now, she is a Moabite. She is a Gentile. She is not a Jew. Okay, she is not a Jew. She's a Gentile. But Boaz recognizes this woman out there, this young lady, who's gleaning and working, and his people tell her, well, her name is Ruth. She's a Moabite. She come back from Moab with Naomi. And she's out here helping Naomi to make a living, basically, to survive, to help themselves. So he notices this young woman. He asks who she is. Now, what Boaz does, he tells her this is in chapter 2 of Ruth, he tells Ruth, don't go anywhere else. Stay here with my people. Stay here with my workers. He says, I have told the young men not to bother you. Don't do anything. Don't worry. They're not going to hurt you. They're not going to be an offense to you at all. So he realizes, too, that Naomi is a near kinswoman, or Naomi is a near kinswoman. So Boaz comes out there. He tells these young men, leave her alone. Don't bother. And Boaz realizes what Ruth is doing, the kindness that she's showing her mother-in-law. He realizes this is a special young lady. You know, when she could have had the chance to go back home to her folks, she came into a foreign land to follow her mother-in-law to help her to survive. She showed so much kindness that Boaz is realizing or deciding to show her kindness in return. So not only does he let her glean in his field, and not only does he tell her not to go anywhere else, he tells his reapers, hey, drop a little extra for her. You know, if you drop some, don't pick it up. Let her pick it up. So he's helping her to get more than what she should have normally, because this woman has a special reputation. She's a very kind and generous young lady. And so he even tells her that she can eat with his workers. He says, when my workers stop to eat, come and eat with them. And so when Ruth goes back home that night, she reports back to Naomi, and she tells Naomi whose field she's gleaning in. And Naomi tells her, hey, he's one of our near kinsmen. He's one of our family. And so Ruth stays with Boaz the entire barley harvest and works with her. And so later on, as he's working, as he's going through this, and she's continuing to work there every day, in chapter 3, Naomi gives Ruth some instructions. Now, these instructions may sound a little bit strange to us today, but he gives her some instructions in how to approach Boaz. Now, again, Naomi knows that Boaz is their near kinsman. And she knows that Boaz is not married. And so she gives Ruth some instructions on how to approach Boaz. Now, Boaz realizes that Ruth is a very special person. She is a widow. She's not a virgin, but he is an older man, probably a little older than she is, because he's owner of a field and he's gone through some other things. So it kind of tells us he's not married, and he said that he probably could be, I surmise that I think the reason why he's not married is because of who his mother was. And if you go back and look in the genealogy that's in the Bible, it's found in Matthew chapter 1, verse 5. It tells us there that Boaz's mother was Rahab the harlot from Jericho. So the book of Ruth is very early in the book of Judges. But so Boaz's mother was a harlot. She was what we would call a prostitute today. So maybe that was the reason why he wasn't married, because he was the son of a prostitute. And I think one of the two spies that searched out Jericho was probably one of those two guys married Rahab, because Rahab basically saved her life. But Boaz's mother was, again, was Rahab the harlot. And as you go down through the line, you'll see something very interesting in all of this. Who is Ruth? She is going to be the great-grandmother of King David, and David is in the lineage of Christ. So Ruth is one of the two Gentile women that's in the lineage of Christ. The other one is Bathsheba, that David had an adulterous affair with. But we see women here. We have Rahab, who is a Gentile. We have Ruth, who is a Gentile. We have several women in the lineage of Christ that have a reputation. It's not really what we would say very good today. But we see how God uses people who he decides to use. God has a plan. And because he takes these two Gentile women and puts them in the lineage of Christ, it shows us that Christ came to die for the world. Not just for the Jewish nation, but for all people. Okay, so this is some to me, very interesting things. So Ruth has these directions from her mother-in-law about how to approach Boaz. And so Boaz, when he goes in to sleep that night at the where they were grinding out the grain, and they had a big place there. They would grind out the grain. The barley was stored on the floor there in heaps. Naomi tells Ruth to go in there and to uncover his feet and lay down. Now, he would have been covered up with probably what we would say is a blanket or a robe or something. But she was to uncover his feet and lay down. And then at midnight, about midnight, Boaz wakes up. And he realizes that there's somebody laying at his feet. And he recognizes that it's Ruth. And so he wakes, he asks whose it is, and she basically asks Boaz to marry her. And that's the way kind of it's not worded that way exactly in Scripture, but that's really what it means. She asked Boaz to marry her. He says to spread your mantle over me. And it's a way of saying that she wanted to marry him, and they were near kinsmen. A near kinsman's responsibility was if a brother had a wife and the wife died, then the brother was responsible to take that woman, that widow, and marry her, take her as his wife, and have children by her so that he would keep the seed, the lineage alive. And so that was kind of the job of a near kinswoman or near kinsperson to do that. And so that's what Boaz was going to do here in this passage in the book of Ruth. But Boaz tells Ruth just to stay there tonight, don't worry. But there is a person who is a closer near kinswoman, kinsperson to you than to me. And he has to have the first option. He has to have the first opportunity to take you as wife. And if he doesn't do it, then I will do it. And so tomorrow he says, I'm going to confront this other person. I'm going to confront this other man. And if he will do it, okay. If he doesn't do it, then I will do it. And so Boaz goes through this, and over in chapter 5, he goes through and he directs what's going to happen. Chapter 4, rather, it's not chapter 5, but he says what's going to happen. Boaz goes through this formality of confronting this other man, and he says, hey, Ruth has come back out of Moab with Naomi, her mother-in-law, and Naomi doesn't have any family. Ruth doesn't have a family, so you're the closest kinsman, so you have the responsibility to marry her and take over the inheritance of them that they have. But the other man says, wait, okay, first he says he's going to do it, and then Boaz says, well, you got to take over their inheritance as well. And he said, well, I can't. If I take over their inheritance, it's going to mess up my inheritance, and I won't be able to continue to do this. So he goes through this, and then so the other guy says he can't do it. So Boaz says, okay, I'm going to do it. He's married. He has children already, and so if he had children and he had children through Ruth, then that would confuse the inheritance and it wouldn't work out. So Boaz goes in, he takes over, he marries her, and he does what he's supposed to do. And because he does this, the people, the blessing that people ask for in Ruth chapter 4, verse number 12, it says the women there bless Ruth, and they bless her in such a way, and they say, let thy house be like the house of Pharez, whom Tamar bore into Judah, of the seed which the Lord shall give thee of this young woman. And it's very interesting there too that Perez, Tamar was his daughter-in-law. And if you remember the story there, Tamar's husband had died, and she was Perez's daughter-in-law. Her husband had died. Her husband told her, or Perez told his daughter-in-law, just wait, and the next son, when he gets old enough, I'll let you marry him. Well, when that came to pass, that didn't happen. And so Tamar got upset. She decided to do something to fix the situation. So she goes and she portrays herself, disguises herself to be like a prostitute. And she goes over to where Perez is shearing his sheep. And he sees her. Of course, she's dressed and looks like a prostitute. She had covered her face with a veil. He didn't recognize her. And so he goes and he wants to have sexual relations with her. And so she says, well, what are you gonna give me? Okay? And he said, well, I'll give you a kid from the flock. And she said, well, what kind of a promise do I have that you're gonna actually give me this? And so he gives her his signet and he gives her his staff, okay, which identifies him. And so she takes it and she says, okay, they have a relationship and she becomes pregnant. Well, later on, after this situation, well, she takes off her clothes and she goes back home. And so Perez sends some people back to where she was at with the kid of the goats to pay her and to get his signet and his staff back. Well, they go there, and of course, she's not there. And so they come back and report that, and he even asks the questions, well, where is that prostitute that was here? And the people said, there was no prostitute here. So then about 3 months later, it's discovered that she's pregnant. And so they're going to have her stoned because that's the custom. And Perez says, well, you know, you've committed adultery, you're pregnant out of wedlock, so we're going to stone you. And she says, well, the person who's his signet and his signet and his staff belong to is the man that caused me or gave me to be pregnant. And so he realizes that he made a mistake and he didn't fulfill his promise, his vow he made to her. And so everything is cool. But that's the reason why it's kind of unusual here that they bless her like this. And again, Tamar she's in the lineage of Christ as well. So all of this is very unique, how God works things out. And what we would look at as evil, God works it out for good. And so the point there too is when things happen in your life that you may think are bad, you may think are evil, you may understand why. God may have a purpose in that. He does it to increase our faith. He does it to draw us closer to Him. He has a lot of reasons why He does these things that He does. So it's very interesting. So Ruth has a son, and the people name him Obed. Obed becomes the grandfather of King David. So it's very interesting. It's very important. So you have a Gentile again who's in the lineage of Christ. You have Rahab, who's a harlot, who's in the lineage of Christ. You have Tamar, who's the daughter-in-law of Jacob. And then you now have Ruth. Rahab, like I said, Rahab and Tamar, Rahab and Ruth, again, are both Gentiles. And so all of this is very plain that God worked it out. You know, we have the famine that seems bad, but God used that to drive Naomi into Moab. Okay? God allowed or caused or whatever you want to, however you want to put it, Naomi's husband to die and then the two sons to die. And God orchestrated this all out for His good and to do a great work that we might say is really strange. But God did this, and He does. Did He cause these things to happen? I don't know. But the fact that Naomi, or Ruth rather, just happened to go on and find Boaz's, just happened to be at Boaz's field to glean, when all the other fields were there, she just happened to be on Boaz's field. Is that a coincidence? Things like that don't happen by accident. It's all about God's plan and how he brings things to back. The fact that Boaz was not married, and he was an older man. He should have been married by now, but he wasn't. God was preserving him, saving him for Ruth. So God brings all this out together to work it out, to bring another Gentile woman into the lineage of Christ, to show that God can use anybody to do his work. God can use anybody to do his work, and he wanted the fact that Christ would come for the whole world, not just for the Jewish nation, but for Gentiles as well, to all people. So nothing happens by chance, nothing happens by accident. We need to remember that God is in complete control of everything that happens. So when you think something bad happens in your life, remember that God works all things out together for his good. Romans 8:28. For God works all things together for his good, for those who love God and who are called according to his purpose. So if you're a Christian here today, God works things out in your life for his good and for his glory, but for your good and for his honor and his glory. He has a purpose on why he does things. So God does what he does. The Westminster Confession of Faith is not something that a lot of people understand or people know, but it says something that's very important about God and providence. It says God from all eternity did by the most wise and holy counsel of his own will freely and unchangeably ordain or make happen whatsoever comes to pass. Okay, let me read that again to you. It says God from all eternity past did by the most wise and holy counsel of his own will freely and unchangeably ordain. Freely and unchangeably ordained. So God has set everything into motion in this world from the very beginning. From the very beginning. From before creation, God set everything in motion that was going to come to pass. That's God's sovereignty, and that's God his holiness. But he did that. Whatever comes to pass, God does it for a reason and for a purpose. You know, the Westminster Confession of Faith is a Presbyterian document, but this is so true. You have to understand it. You have to believe it. If you don't believe that God is sovereign, then I doubt who you are. Because as a Christian, as a believer, somebody who knows the Word of God, you have to understand that God is totally sovereign. And that it comes out in so many different areas, so many different ways of our life. God is completely and totally sovereign. And if you don't really believe that, I would suggest that you are probably an atheist. Because an atheist doesn't believe God. But if you believe in God, you have to believe that he is totally sovereign. He's in completely control of everything. An atheist believes in evolution. They believe that things happen by chance, that things happen by accident. Sometimes we do things. Sometimes I know I preach a message in our church, and somebody else will come back with, wow, I just studied that, or I just read something about that. And God works these things out. God does everything for a reason, for a purpose. He brings all things together. So there's no such thing as coincidence. It may seem like coincidental to us, but nothing is coincidental to God. He has a reason for a purpose behind everything. He's never surprised. He's never caught off guard. Nothing shocks God. We see all the things that's going on in our world today, the things that's going on in our country today, all the division and the divide and the violence and all the things that's going on that seem to be right in contradiction of Christianity. That doesn't catch God by surprise. He knows. He knew this was coming about before it ever came about. The word chance is really, the word chance is only good in gambling. If you like to gamble, which I hope you don't, gambling is where they use the word chance. It's like a rolling of the dice. It's a mathematical possibility. That's chance. But God leaves nothing up to chance. And I don't understand, the word chance has no power, okay? The word chance has no power, but yet evolutionists and very highly educated people want to tell you that this world happened by chance. What kind of power does chance have? Chance can't do anything. Chance can't change anything. Nothing happens by chance. So to say that this world come about by accident, or by chance rather, is not a very educated statement. It's a very uneducated statement because you don't understand what chance is. Chance is not the ultimate authority. The ultimate cause behind everything is God. Chance is just a word. Again, it can't do anything. And what about providence? You know, providence is the way that we should be things as Christians. It's God's involvement in the world. It's just like we just read here with the story of Ruth. It's God's involvement in the world. God's providence worked all that out through Naomi's life, through Ruth's life, through Boaz's life. All that came about for God's good, for the people's good, and for God's glory. Remember that this book of Ruth, when it took place, I told you that it takes place in the time of Judges. And this story of Ruth is maybe at the end of the period of Judges. I think it's very more near the beginning of the book of Judges because of who Boaz is and who his mother was. So there's a lot of reasons here what was going on and why these things happen. But too many times today, people will refuse to believe that God is divine, that he is sovereign, that he has a reason behind all these things that go on. And too many people want to blame God for their problems, blame God for the problems in this world. But we don't believe that, you know, that we have all these evils going on around the world, but God is in control of that. God's in control of each and everything that happens. You know, there was a mountain climber once, you know, I'm going to try to get this through before we run out of time. He slipped on a ledge, and he fell, and he grabbed a hold of a little branch, and he was looking down below him, and it was 1,000 feet to his death. And he was holding on to that branch, and it was about to give away, and he looked up into heaven, and he said, is there anybody up there that can help? Is there anybody up there that can help me? And a voice out of heaven came down and said, this deep, strong voice from the sky said, yes, I'm here. I can help you. Just let go of that branch, that tree, and trust me. And the guy thought for a second, and he looked back up to heaven again, and he says, is there anybody else up there? You know, he wasn't willing to trust. He wasn't ready to trust. He believed there might have been somebody there, up there in the heaven that could help him, but he really wasn't wanting to trust that one that was there. He cried out. He was looking for somebody who could help him. But a lot of people look at providence in that way. They look at somebody, they want to find somebody to help, but they're not willing to trust. And we're believing in a universe that's closed. People believe in a universe that's closed, that there's no outside help. But remember that God is there. God is in control, and God is doing all things for his honor and his glory and for your good.